Hello friends, long time no see. Today's video is going to be about my favorite games in a top 10 format specifically, which was honestly really tough to sort out. So that's why it's taken a bit of time. I hope that at least the results are good enough. So here are the rules, which there's only one. And that rule is that I can't put multiple games from the same series on this list, because if I do, it would be less variety and frankly it would be more boring. Which the only thing which that's what the honorable mentions for is, right? It's gonna be for those that don't follow the rules. That and for those that don't make it on the list. So to keep it simple, we're going to go ahead and start from 10. And number 10 is Katana Zero. This is a platformer game that uses speed mechanics and encourages speedrunning. It's also got a pretty heavy emphasis on story that works really well. And it's just a really good art-driven game that unfortunately really needs a sequel that doesn't exist yet, because the first game ends too soon, and that's not something I can say for a lot of games, at least in my opinion. Number 9 on this list is a simple and easy choice, and that would be Dragon Ball FighterZ. Dragon Ball FighterZ is, well, a fighting game that is made by, let me see here, Arc System Works, which they've made quite a few impressive fighting games, all along the same lines of, they have a specialty in making 3D models look anime, and it's just a really good game, even on a casual level. That said, could have done without so much DLC that it's the price of 2 other games, but that's probably the only thing that knocks it down on this list. It's a pretty good game. Moving on to number 8 on this list, that would be Shadow of the Colossus, which honestly, I juggled this one around. I thought maybe it could go higher and maybe go where it is, but I wouldn't put it any lower than this. So this is where I would put this. This game has a special place for me because I really like artsy games in a way that don't spend too much time. Like, the game isn't trying to waste your time and bloat itself. It's just trying to give you the experience it wants to. And I think that's something that Shadow of the Colossus excels at, especially in its art direction and everything else. It's a beautiful game. And also, it's pretty much a boss rush game, which I also like. I love bosses. That's what I go back to games for, really, most of the time. Put a good boss fight in the game and you got me sold. I know we're breezing on through, but I'll probably spend a little more time on this one. This being Castlevania Symphony of the Night as number 7. Which, this is probably an obvious choice on some lists, but I'm a Castlevania fan on a level beyond just liking this game. I'm actually a huge fan of the Game Boy Advance games, some of the DS ones too. But the reason I chose Symphony of the Night isn't just because it's the choice everyone would pick, but because overall it is the best experience of the ones I've played, which says something as a game. I mean, considering how good most of the Castlevania games are in the series, not all of them, but most of them, it's impressive that this sits at the top and continues to do so to this day, despite it'll probably stay there because unfortunately we haven't gotten a new Castlevania game in a very long time. So that part's a bummer, but at least that we have this game to stand on for a PS1 classic. Next one on the list, number 6, is actually probably going to be a surprise. not necessarily a surprise, but it's not super well known, even though it's kind of recent. And this game just has probably the silliest title ever, Unicorn Overlord. Now, despite this title, it's actually pretty thematic, but what matters is that this game on a technical level, in terms of design, is absolutely impeccable. I've not played an RPG quite like it, and it's actually just probably one of the best RPGs I've played. It's very tactical, and relies on some of its own unique functions in a hybrid system that makes it a very unique experience even among RPGs of its kind, which I think more RPGs need these days because they're very hard to separate from each other, and JRPGs in particular are very oversaturated. Moving on from that, we have a pretty solid classic on our hands. I'd say a lot of us have played this game. That being number 5, Pokemon Black version 2, also White version 2, but they're relatively the same game. Now this is a simple choice. It's Pokemon. It's some of the best of Pokemon in my opinion. And story-wise, I'd say the 2 games that make up the whole package, that being the first game and this sequel that I have listed, make up one of the better stories in the series. But not only that, I just think that Black version 2 is one of the most feature-rich games in the series, which is something that has been lacking from modern Game Freak. And I just find the features that this game does have to be the most enjoyable. And that's why I chose this game for the list. Moving on to number 4, we're getting up there already. And that would be none other than Death Stranding. Probably a game that, if you've played it, you can understand its position, but if you haven't, you just think the game is really weird because it's made by a crazed man. Now, I say that jokingly, but it really is a unique game storytelling-wise, but if you get the gist of it, you understand it. The weirdest part that is probably the most notable for people is that there's a baby strapped to your chest that's stillborn, and the reason it's attached to your chest is because it maintains a link between life and death in its chamber, and that makes you able to detect ghosts from beyond the dead. I hope I explained that well because it's honestly hard to explain, but that's essentially the gist. Now, number 3 on our list probably isn't as easy to explain because it's probably going to be a surprise. Now, I'm a Sonic fan, so this is definitely part of why this was my choice, but honestly, this decision was probably one of the hardest to make in the entire list because I had to choose one Sonic game above all the rest, and that was difficult. But I did just that. Number 3 is Sonic Frontiers, the open world Sonic game, or the open zone Sonic game that has its own combat and stuff like that. It also has multiple playable characters once you get to the DLC of the game, and it's the first game that allows you to play as other Sonic characters besides Sonic in a relatively long while outside of like a custom character in Sonic Forces and I guess Mania, which those games are getting old too, which makes me feel old. But enough about mortality. Essentially, Sonic Frontiers is just a game that I really like, and there's not really much else to talk about. It's just good all around despite its flaws, and I enjoyed learning speedrun tech for the game, and that and breaking the walls of the open zone and everything like that. The story is pretty solid too. I wouldn't call it amazing, but for a Sonic story, it's pretty good. And next we got our number 2 spot, which this will also probably seem kind of random, but trust me, it's a really good game. And that game is Final Fantasy Tactics A2, Grimoire of the Rift. This game is part of the Final Fantasy Tactics series, which is well known because the first game is really good, and the sequels aren't as known or played. But in my opinion, this sequel, the DS sequel, is the best game in the series. And it's also probably the best Final Fantasy game to use the job system, in my opinion. This, along its satisfying gameplay loop of doing pub missions and just coming back from those to do story quests once you're leveled up enough, is honestly just, it's a very simple sort of RPG structure, and I think that simplicity actually worked really well towards the game's creation. Its world map is also very simple in the sense that it doesn't bloat you with locations and stuff. It's just a map where you go to do the quests on your quest board, and I think it's just a great game that uses its mechanics in a wonderful way. Now, as is typical of a top 10, before we get to number 1, we're going to do our honorable mentions. Yay! And our first honorable mention will be simple. The only reason it didn't get on the list is that Sonic Frontiers got on the list, and that's Sonic Heroes. It was very hard to choose between these two because I really like this game, and it's got a lot of childhood nostalgia for me. But I have a feeling that nostalgia probably doesn't hold up today, which is why it's in the honorable mentions. Next is 13 Sentinels, which is actually made by the same people as Unicorn Overlord, so it couldn't be on this list, even though they're pretty different games, but I feel like they're stylistically close enough to where it would have been weird to have both on the list. But honestly, between the two, it was just like a hair difference of which one I would have chose to put on the list. So if you think Unicorn Overlord is good, or you happen to pick it up because of this list, you're probably going to like 13 Sentinels as well. Another simple given one here is Super Mario Wonder. I wanted to put a Mario game on this list because I do really like them, but they don't have so much impact in my life that I'd ever call any of them a favorite game. But they've brought me a lot of joy over the years just through multiplayer and stuff like that. And I have a feeling that Mario Wonder is probably the best of its platformers. Even now, after giving it some time to think, I think it just barely beats Super Mario World, which is another game that I really enjoy. That is also one of their platformers. Lastly, and this was probably the toughest to get rid of, you can consider this one the unofficial number 11, Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread is just a really good compact game, but it's so hard. It is one of the hardest games I've ever played. But it was so rewarding to beat it. And it is honestly a really, really good game and barely made it off of this list. So again, that's another good recommendation if you like anything else on this list. And that brings us to number 1. And as I'm sure you've noticed, there's been a trend of DS games on the list. And unfortunately, that's just because DS games are goated. This game is also going to be a DS game. And our number 1 spot goes to none other than Dragon Quest Heroes Rocket Slime. I know, you've probably never heard of this game in your life. I know, but I promise this is a really good game, and it's made for kids. It's a kids game. It's a game where you use a slime to operate a tank and fight other tanks. It's just a game that I really loved, and there's probably definitely nostalgia with this one, but despite that, I still think it takes my number one spot as my favorite game that I've ever played. That said, that's the list, and I hope you liked it. Yeah, that's it. If you like any of the recommendations, leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe. I've been getting a little bit more traction lately, and I wanted to thank you all for that. Because I've been trying this new style out, and it's been working pretty well. That being said, I'm signing off for today, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.